Okay, hello again. In this video, we're looking at clause 613 of ISO 27001. Firstly, it's an, this is probably one of the most important clauses of ISO 27001 when it comes to risk, partly because it introduces an annex which is going beyond the likes of ISO 27001. It introduces the annex as a set of requirements because it's necessary for an auditor to be able to reference a table like this to ensure that it has the organization is taking a comprehensive view of the controls necessary to mitigate risk assessment results. So essentially, that's the first bit of it, that there's a published annex with a table of controls that need to be met. And the second thing is it requires the production of a statement of applicability, which is a document we're going to become very familiar with over time. So let's look at the criteria. The organization shall define and apply an information security risk treatment process. So first of all, it's a process. Enable ISO customers will be familiar with the scope statement, which defines what the processes are. So we're not talking about an operational or a support process in that regard. However, there are a number of IT or information security processes that are required to establish particular controls to meet information security criteria. And largely these will be contained within table or Annex A of the ISO 27001 standard. We produce also an organizational risk and business continuity policy statement. And that document describes the risk treatment process that's employed by Enable ISO customers if they accept it that way. And of course, it would need to be edited if there are any changes. So let's look at the criteria in detail. I'm going to take A and B together. So first of all, once we've identified, which we've done previously, we've identified the risks that need to be addressed, and we've assessed those risks for the potential impact and the prioritization. And now the job of under 613, the job of the organization is to make sure that we select appropriate treatments. I think without looking at in too much, closely to the specific meaning of each word, the simplicity here is that there will be a lot of technical controls already available to the organization, and mostly in preparation for certification. All we're being asked to do is to describe what we probably have in place already to some degree. So most organizations will be already a good portion of the way towards meeting all of the requirements. Maybe just a little bit of tweaking or additional controls that need to be introduced just to make sure that it's fully conformed. So number one, select appropriate information risk treatment options, taking account of the risk assessment results, and then determine all controls that are necessary to implement the information security risk treatment options chosen. Okay, so the note here is important. Organizations can design controls as required. That can be policy driven or process driven, where you decide you're going to do things a particular way to suit your own needs, or you can identify them from any source. That might be a technical control that you use, maybe like, for example, Enable ISO uses Trend Micro for malware and antivirus controls. And that's across all of our organizations with a good admin dashboard available to us for accessing organization-wide data and activities. So that's very, very, very important. I guess one of the things that can be done here is looking at table A or Annex A of the standard and might inform us as to the types of controls we should be looking to, because it actually does provide a good framework there to work and help do some preparatory work here. Looking at C and D together then, we compare the controls determined in 613 above, and then we produce a statement of applicability in D. Now, look, the detail of the criteria as published here It's there for you to read. But largely what it's saying is that you need to make sure that all of the controls that you've selected to meet the results of your risk assessment, that you need to document them in such a way, and I'll point you to the word contain, which is very important here, right? So you produce a statement of applicability that contains the necessary controls, which means you need to describe the control within the statement of applicability. And we encourage our customers to try and describe it in such a way that the control is described entirely, and that there's no need then to reference another document where there's further information required to describe the control. It's important as well to look at in D, you've got, you produce a statement of applicability that contains the necessary controls and justifications for inclusions, whether they are implemented or not. So in other words, an organization can define the controls that they are implementing, so long as there's work in progress or some kind of a planned schedule for closing out and meeting the requirement of the control. The second part of that, the last part of that sentence rather, is and the justification for exclusions of controls. So what I would say is you need a significant justification in most instances, because a lot of these controls will be available or within the capacity of the organization to implement. So choosing not to implement becomes an issue then. You've got to be able to support that with some rationale. Moving on, formulate an information security risk treatment plan and obtain risk owners' approval of the information security risk treatment plan and acceptance of the residual information security risks. One of the things that our customers will be familiar with is the structure of the risk registers, both with contextual issues and the process risk register, which is to come in clause 8. But essentially, the requirements of this part of the standard is for you to plan your risk treatments, obviously based on that comparison that's been done preceding to this. So firstly, the statement of applicability can be used to describe the risk treatment plans, so long as you can show an auditor that that's actually sufficient, that works for you. The second part of it is where you're using the contextual issues register. You'll see that the structure of the document is such that going from left to right across the risk side of the register, you're going to have an analysis carried out of each risk to determine the prioritization and the level of risk that we need to control. And then there's a risk treatment description. So where it's outside of the statement of applicability, the expectation is that the risk treatment plan will be described there in the contextual issues register. If there's a need then for the organization to implement a process or an incident response plan to mitigate a particular risk, that's where we deal with it as a process and document it in the process risk register as an incident response plan as a process of itself. So I think within the context of those organizations who are going for ISO 27001 certification, it's important to understand that our customers, you're using the TMS registers, the contextual issues registers, the process risk register, the policy statements we've given you, all answer the requirements of the standard. But the important thing here is to make sure that you use the register to fully describe the risk treatment. And once you do that, we're going to meet the requirements of the organization. I think in relation to the following bullet points, you've got another requirement that the organization shall retain documented information about the information security risk treatment process. The organization risk and business continuity management policy statement contains the information that's needed to provide the supporting documentation, documented evidence. And I just want to mention the note at the bottom, because our customers will be familiar when we've been introducing the contextual issues register and the process risk register. When we've looked at the right-hand side of those registers, and we would have described how we've drawn the criteria for those registers from ISO 31000, which is the guidelines for risk management and best practice. So just to recap then on the intent of this part of the standard, largely we've already carried out risk assessments to meet the requirements of clause 612. We've now got an obligation to compare the controls we select, or first of all, select those controls and then compare them with the published controls in Table A or Annex A of the standard. The important thing here is that this is where the requirement of the standard is for the production of a statement of applicability, which contains the controls. And, you know, that's something that's very important for me. And one of the reasons why it must contain the control, just to note, is that when you're submitting your application for an audit to your selected certification body, you must submit a copy of your statement of applicability so that the certification body can determine the number of hours audit time that's required to audit your organization, and maybe if there are any unusual aspects that need to be considered, which may increase or even decrease audit time allocation. So it's impossible for a certification body to truly quote for you and give you an accurate audit plan without you submitting a completed statement of applicability along with your application for audit. So that's just one note to keep in mind. It's very important. Other than that, I'm hoping that this has been useful. If there are any questions, please go to the chat box on the website, or you can contact us through the usual contact form and so on. That's it for now. Thank you very much.